The job advertisement is well written. Customer service and translation work for an international company based in Thailand. Accommodation provided, flights covered, $1,500 to $3,000 a month. English required, a second language preferred. For a graduate in Nairobi, or Manila, or Ho Chi Minh City, or Lahore, that salary is transformative. Thousands apply. The interview is conducted online and is entirely professional. There is a contract. There is an offer letter. There is a flight booked to Bangkok. You land. Someone meets you with your name on a sign and drives you toward the office. The drive is long. It goes east, then north, through countryside, and then the road turns bad. At some point in the dark you are put into a boat and taken across a narrow river. On the far bank there are men with rifles. Your passport and your phone are taken from you. You are driven through a gate in a high wall, into a compound of concrete towers with barred windows, and you are told what you actually do here, and how much you now owe for the cost of bringing you. You are no longer in Thailand. You are in Myanmar, in a border region the government in that country does not control, and it will be many months before anyone outside knows where you are. Welcome to this episode of The Great Cons. Every week on this channel, we take apart one great deception, tracing not just what the con artist did, but how it actually worked, why intelligent and cautious people believed it, and what it cost the ones who did. Some of these stories are about frauds so large they reshaped the law. Others are about small, strange, brilliant deceptions that fooled experts for decades. All of them share something. At some point, somebody trusted somebody else, and that trust was the raw material the whole thing was built from. Last time we examined romance fraud, and at the end of that episode one said something that many people find hard to believe, that the person on the other end of the conversation may themselves be a prisoner. Today we are going to look at that properly, because it is the single strangest and darkest development in the history of fraud. Over roughly the last 6 years, online scamming has been industrialized. It now operates from purpose-built compounds housing thousands of people, in territories chosen specifically because no functioning government controls them, and a substantial proportion of the workforce was trafficked into place and cannot leave. Two sets of victims, at opposite ends of the same conversation, either of whom has any idea what the other is. Before we begin, 2 notes. This episode describes forced labor, confinement, and violence. I will report what has been documented by the United Nations, by national investigators, and by journalists and escapees, and I will report it plainly rather than luridly. And this is a fast-moving story in which enforcement operations, sanctions, and compound closures happen continuously, so if you are watching this sometime after publication, check current reporting, because details will have moved on. Let's start with the scale, because it is the part that people assume must be exaggerated. In August of 2023, the United Nations Human Rights Office published an assessment of the situation. Its estimate was that at least 120,000 people were being held in scam operations in Myanmar, and at least 100,000 in Cambodia. It described those as conservative figures, and it noted significant operations in Laos, the Philippines, and elsewhere in the region. Those are not figures for people working in fraud generally. They are figures for people held in situations the United Nations characterized as involving trafficking, forced labor, and other serious human rights violations. On the money, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and independent researchers have produced estimates for the revenue generated. Figures in the range of tens of billions of dollars annually from East and Southeast Asian operations alone are commonly cited, and one widely referenced analysis by the United States Institute of Peace estimated global proceeds from this industry at figures in the order of $60 billion a year. To put that in context, that is comparable to the gross domestic product of a mid-sized country, generated by an industry that formally does not exist, in territories that formally are not being governed by the people running them. So how did this happen? The answer is a chain of events that is almost accidental, and it starts with gambling. Online gambling is prohibited in mainland China, and the market for it among Chinese citizens is enormous. Through the 2010s, criminal and semi-criminal operators established gambling businesses in Southeast Asia, physically located outside China, targeting Chinese customers online and drawing Chinese gamblers to physical casinos. The most striking example was Sihanoukville, a quiet Cambodian coastal town that had been known chiefly for beaches and backpackers. From around 2016, an extraordinary wave of Chinese investment arrived. Casinos multiplied, high-rise construction covered the town, and the local economy transformed almost overnight. Reporting from the period describes a boom town with all the associated problems: soaring rents, displacement of residents, and a sharp rise in violent crime and kidnapping connected to gambling debts. Then two things happened in quick succession. In 2019, under pressure from Beijing, the Cambodian government banned online gambling. The industry that had built Sihanoukville collapsed. Investors walked away, leaving a skyline of half-finished concrete towers. And in 2020, the pandemic closed borders across the region. The physical casinos that remained lost their customers entirely, because the customers could not travel. What was left was a great deal of empty purpose-built property, a large workforce of people experienced in online operations targeting Chinese-speaking customers, established relationships with corrupt officials, and organized criminal groups with capital and no revenue. They pivoted to fraud. The buildings were already there. Now the geography, because where these operations sit is not accidental at all. The largest concentrations grew up in places where central government authority is absent or nominal. In Myanmar, the key areas lie along the eastern border with Thailand and in the northeast near China. The Mayawati area in Karen State became the most notorious. This territory is controlled not by the Myanmar military government in any meaningful sense but by armed ethnic organizations and border militia forces, which have made arrangements with the operators. Two names recur in the reporting: Shikoku, promoted publicly as a new city development project, and KK Park, a large compound complex. In the north, the Kokang region around Locking developed a similar industry under the control of local ruling families, and became notorious enough that it eventually provoked direct action, which we will come to. In Cambodia, operations spread from Sihanoukville to Phnom Penh, to the border town of Poipet, and to Bavay on the Vietnamese border. In Laos, the Golden Triangle Special Economic Zone in Bokeo Province, an area leased to a private operator and effectively self-governing, became another hub. Its principal figure and the associated casino group were sanctioned by the United States as far back as 2018 over allegations of trafficking and other criminal activity. And the military coup in Myanmar in February 2021 removed whatever remaining central oversight existed and plunged the country into civil conflict, which made the border regions still more attractive to operators who wanted to be somewhere nobody could reach them. The pattern is consistent. These operations locate precisely at the seams of the international system: border zones, autonomous regions, leased territories, and special economic zones where the question of who is actually in charge has no clean answer. Now let's talk about the recruitment, because this is where the human story begins. The advertisements are professional. They appear on mainstream job boards, on social media, on messaging platforms, and through recruitment agencies that may themselves be legitimate businesses that have been deceived. They advertise customer service roles, translation, marketing, data entry, content moderation, and increasingly cryptocurrency and technology positions. The salaries offered are high but not absurd, which is important. An offer that is 10 times the local rate raises suspicion. An offer that is 2 or 3 times it, from a company that appears to be a real international firm, does not. The people who apply are not desperate or uneducated. This is one of the most consistent findings in the reporting, and it matters. The workforce these operations want is young, university educated, fluent in English and often 2 or 3 other languages, digitally literate, and comfortable in online conversation. Those are exactly the people who make convincing romance and investment fraudsters. Recruitment began among Chinese nationals and expanded rapidly outward. Documented cases now involve people from Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Taiwan, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. It expanded further to Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, Nigeria, and other African countries, and to Brazil, and to countries in Europe and Central Asia. Governments across several continents have had to organize repatriations of their own citizens. The journey follows a pattern. The recruit flies to a legitimate destination, usually Bangkok, sometimes Phnom Penh. They are met. They are transported overland toward a border. In the Myanmar cases, the final stage is frequently a crossing of the Moy River by small boat, at night, at an unofficial point. Many do not realize they have left Thailand until it is explained to them. A particularly grim variant is recruitment by people already inside. Workers under quota pressure are sometimes rewarded for bringing in others, so a message arrives from a genuine friend, a real person the recruit actually knows, describing a real job. The friend is not lying about the salary. The friend is trapped and has been given a target. Shikoku deserves a closer look, because it demonstrates how openly this was done. The project was presented to the world as a legitimate development, a new city rising on the Myanmar bank of the Moy River, promoted with architectural renderings, promotional videos, and the language of international investment. It was to have hotels, resorts, residential towers, a golf course, and an industrial zone. It was described in marketing material as a flagship project connected to major regional development initiatives, a claim that was subsequently and firmly disputed by the government whose initiative was being invoked. The figure behind it, Shi Zhejiang, held Cambodian citizenship, operated through a company called Yatai International, and had a prior conviction in China relating to illegal gambling. The development was carried out in partnership with a local border militia force, which provided the security and the political cover, and which took a share. What was actually built was substantial. Journalists and satellite analysts documented rapid construction of large complexes of buildings, and residents of the area described an influx of foreign workers and heavy security. What it became was one of the principal centers of the scam industry on that border. Shi Zhejiang was arrested in Thailand in 2022 on a Chinese warrant, and his case turned into a prolonged legal battle over extradition, during which he gave interviews from detention making a range of claims about his activities and his relationships with various authorities. The reason Shikoku matters as an illustration is that it was not hidden. There was a website. There were promotional materials. There were investment prospectuses. Journalists were writing about the concerns from an early stage. The construction was visible from space and visible from the Thai side of the river, where people could stand and look at it. An industry running on forced labor was built in plain view, marketed as urban development, and continued expanding for years while the concerns were being publicly documented. That is not a failure of information. It is a failure of anyone with jurisdiction being willing or able to act on information that was freely available. Now, what happens inside? The first step, consistently reported, is confiscation of passport and phone. That single act converts a person from a foreign worker into someone who cannot cross a border, cannot identify themselves, and cannot contact anyone. The second is the imposition of debt. The recruit is informed that the company has spent money on their flights, their transport, their accommodation, and their training, and that they must work to repay it. The sum is set by the operator and can be increased. Anyone wishing to leave must buy themselves out, at a price frequently reported in the tens of thousands of dollars, which is precisely calibrated to be beyond what a young graduate's family can raise. This is debt bondage, and it is one of the oldest mechanisms of forced labor in existence, running here on fiber optic cable in 21st century office blocks. The work is organized industrially. Reporting and escapee testimony describes shifts of 12 to 16 hours, with quotas, a required number of new contacts initiated, conversations sustained, or a target sum extracted per month. Performance is monitored on screens and boards. There is a hierarchy of supervisors and team leaders. The operations run on written materials. Investigators and journalists who have obtained internal documents describe detailed manuals, scripts for opening conversations, guidance on building emotional dependency, instructions on identifying which targets have money, prepared responses to common objections and suspicions, and material on the psychology of the people being targeted. Some of these documents are lengthy and carefully structured, more like corporate training material than anything you would associate with street crime. Labor is divided. Some workers do nothing but generate initial contacts at volume. Others take over conversations that show promise. Others handle the final extraction. Separate technical teams build and maintain the fake investment platforms, complete with functioning interfaces and fabricated price charts. Separate financial teams handle the movement of the proceeds. It is, in every structural sense, a company. It is worth being concrete about what the daily work involves, because the mundanity of it is part of what people find hardest to picture. A worker sits at a desk with several phones and a computer. They are issued with lists of contact details, which the operation has purchased. Those lists are a commodity in their own right, bought from data brokers, harvested from breaches, scraped from social platforms, or acquired from other criminal groups, and they are frequently segmented by nationality, age, and apparent wealth. A worker may be assigned a specific demographic to approach. They operate multiple personas simultaneously, each with its own profile, photographs, and backstory, and each requiring consistency. Detailed notes are kept on every target: family members, occupation, health, interests, financial position, emotional state, and where the conversation currently stands. When shifts change, another worker picks up the same conversations from the notes. That last detail is worth pausing on. It means that a person who believes they have been talking to one individual for 8 months may have been talking to a rotating group of strangers reading each other's files. The work is measured. Reporting describes leaderboards, daily targets for messages sent and new contacts converted, and monthly extraction quotas. Failing to hit them has consequences, which we will come to. And it is emotionally corrosive work even for those doing it willingly. Escapees have described the experience of spending 14 hours a day manufacturing intimacy with lonely strangers, reading their messages about their late spouses and their grandchildren, and then being required to take their savings. Several have described that as the part they found hardest, and some have described attempting to warn targets covertly, at considerable personal risk. And then there is the coercion, which is where this stops resembling a company at all. The United Nations Human Rights Assessment, national investigations, and a large body of testimony from people who have escaped describe a consistent set of practices used against those who fail to meet targets or attempt to leave: beatings, confinement in dark rooms, the use of electric shocks, deprivation of food, and forced physical punishment. There are reports of workers being made to watch punishments inflicted on others as a disciplinary measure. There is also the practice that most clearly reveals what these people are considered to be. Workers who underperform are sold. A person is transferred from one compound to another for a price, sometimes across a border, and the debt is transferred with them and often increased. Individuals have described being sold multiple times. A human being with a market value, transferred between owners, working to pay off a debt they cannot discharge, unable to leave the premises. There is only one accurate word for that arrangement, and the international organizations examining it have not hesitated to use it. Now I want to introduce a complication, because an honest account requires it. Not everyone inside these compounds was trafficked. Some people applied knowing broadly what the work was, because it pays well. Some entered under deception and subsequently chose to stay, having discovered they were good at it and that the money was real. And there's a promotion pathway. Workers who perform can be moved into supervisory roles, and supervisors participate in the coercion of those below them. So the population inside a compound is not cleanly divided into innocent captives and evil criminals. It is a spectrum, and people move along it in both directions, sometimes under pressure and sometimes not. A person can be simultaneously a trafficking victim and someone who has defrauded a pensioner out of their retirement savings. Both facts are true at once, and neither cancels the other. This creates genuine difficulty for law enforcement and for the countries receiving repatriated citizens, and we will return to it, because it is the point where the response most often goes wrong. Let's follow the money, because the financial infrastructure is what makes the whole thing viable, and it is where the most effective pressure has been applied. The proceeds move overwhelmingly in cryptocurrency, and the reason is straightforward. Blockchain transactions cannot be reversed. A bank transfer can be recalled and a card payment can be charged back, but once cryptocurrency has left a victim's wallet, no authority can undo it. Dollar-pegged stablecoins are particularly favored, because they combine the irreversibility of crypto with the price stability of a normal currency, which matters when you are moving large sums and do not want the value to swing while you launder it. The laundering itself runs through networks of intermediaries, exchanges with weak identity checks, over-the-counter brokers, chains of wallets designed to break the audit trail, and online marketplaces that function as guarantee services for criminal transactions. That last category produced one of the most significant enforcement developments in this whole story. Investigators and blockchain analysis firms identified an enormous online marketplace operating out of Cambodia which functioned as a clearinghouse for criminal services, including money laundering, stolen data, and the tools of the fraud trade. In 2025, the United States Treasury's Financial Crimes Network moved against the associated conglomerate, and the marketplace subsequently shut down, though successor services appeared quickly. The physical infrastructure matters too. When authorities cut electricity and internet to border compounds, operators responded by procuring satellite internet terminals and diesel generators. Investigations have traced significant numbers of satellite terminals into these areas, and the companies involved have faced pressure to disable them. So what has actually been done? Before we get to governments, it is worth recognizing who was doing this work first, because for several years it was not states at all. The earliest sustained response came from civil society, from volunteer networks, small non-governmental organizations, and in a number of cases from fraud victims themselves. One of the notable groups in this field was founded by people who had lost money to these operations and who began investigating the industry that had taken it, eventually finding themselves helping trafficked workers escape. The mechanics of an escape are precarious. A worker gets access to a phone, sometimes a hidden second device, sometimes by using a compound phone briefly. They send a message with whatever location information they have. Volunteers on the outside attempt to establish where they actually are, which is not straightforward when the person may not know what country they are in. Contact is then made with whatever authority might act, and families are helped to navigate embassies and foreign ministries that in many cases have no established procedure for this situation. Families have also driven a great deal of the pressure. Relatives of missing workers organized, publicized cases, lobbied their own governments, and in several countries forced the issue onto the political agenda when official interest was minimal. Escapes themselves have taken various forms. Some workers have gone over walls. Some have swum rivers. Some have been released after payment of a ransom, which families have raised by selling property. Some have been freed in raids. Some have simply been ejected when a compound relocated and they were not worth transporting. And a significant number have not got out. Governments have acknowledged cases where citizens are known to be inside and cannot be reached, and there are people whose families have had no contact for years. That volunteer and family-led effort carried this issue for a long time before any state treated it as a priority, and much of what is now known about the interior of these compounds was documented by people with no resources and no official standing. For years, official action was remarkably limited, and the reason is the geography. These compounds sit in places where the government that nominally holds sovereignty cannot enter, and where the actual authorities are participants. Foreign police forces have no jurisdiction. Extradition is meaningless when there is no functioning legal counterparty. Two things changed that, and the first was a story about an actor. In January of 2025, a young Chinese actor named Wang Xing traveled to Thailand for what he had been told was a film casting. He was trafficked across the border into Myanmar. His girlfriend publicized the disappearance, and it exploded across Chinese social media, generating enormous public attention. He was recovered within days. But the case did something the preceding years of reporting on tens of thousands of anonymous victims had not managed. It made Chinese tourists afraid of Thailand, and Chinese tourism is a very large part of the Thai economy. Bookings were cancelled at scale. Suddenly, a government with the capacity to act had a powerful commercial reason to act. In February of 2025, Thailand cut electricity, internet, and fuel supplies to several areas across the Myanmar border associated with scam operations. Pressure was applied through Chinese, Thai, and Myanmar channels simultaneously. Thousands of workers were released from compounds and moved toward the border. And then the response revealed its central failure. The released workers, from dozens of countries, arrived at a border with no passports, no documentation, and no clear legal status. Many were held for extended periods in improvised facilities in difficult conditions while their governments arranged verification and repatriation, a process that for some nationalities took months. Aid organizations described serious shortages of food, water, and medical care. People who had been held in forced labor were, on release, detained again as undocumented migrants. This is the single most important policy point in this episode. When a trafficked person is treated as an illegal immigrant, or as a criminal accomplice rather than as a victim, several things follow. They are less likely to cooperate with investigators. Others still inside become less likely to attempt escape, because they hear what happened. And the operators gain a genuinely effective retention tool. They can truthfully tell workers that if they run, they will be locked up by the authorities as well. Alongside the border operations came financial enforcement, and here the results have been more substantial. Through 2025, coordinated action by the United States and the United Kingdom targeted a major transnational network associated with these operations, resulting in sanctions, indictments, and the seizure of an enormous quantity of cryptocurrency, reported at the time as among the largest forfeiture actions ever undertaken by the United States Department of Justice. Assets including property in London and elsewhere were frozen. There have also been military and police actions. In late 2023, a coordinated offensive by armed groups in northern Myanmar overran the Koh Kong region, and the ruling families associated with the scam industry there were removed, with a number of individuals handed to China, where prosecutions followed and some resulted in death sentences. Chinese authorities have repatriated tens of thousands of their own citizens from the region. Raids on compound complexes in the Mayawati area took place through 2025, with buildings demolished and large numbers of workers removed. And individual figures have been pursued. The promoter of the Shukoko development was arrested in Thailand in 2022, and his case became a protracted legal battle over extradition. So is it over? No. And the reason is the same reason this industry started where it did. The compounds are physical, but the business is not. It requires laptops, internet connectivity, electricity, a supply of workers, and an authority willing to be paid to look away. All of those things are available in a great many places on Earth. When pressure was applied in one border area, operations moved to others. There is documented evidence of the model spreading well beyond Southeast Asia. Operations with the same structural signature, compound-based, using trafficked or coerced multilingual workers, running romance and investment fraud at scale, have been reported in parts of Africa, in South America, in the Middle East, and in Eastern Europe. That geographic spread has a consequence worth noting. It also broadens the recruitment pool, which is why job advertisements of the kind we opened with now circulate in far more countries than they did 3 years ago. There is also a structural problem that no enforcement action has solved. Every element of this industry sits in a different jurisdiction from every other. The victim is in one country. The worker is a citizen of a second, held in a third, working for a company registered in a fourth, using servers in a fifth, moving money through exchanges in a sixth, controlled by people living comfortably in a seventh. Prosecuting that requires cooperation among all of them, and the criminals only need one link in the chain to be a place where cooperation does not happen. There is a third set of people affected by this, and they are almost never mentioned. The places where these compounds were built had populations living in them already. In Sihanoukville, the boom and the collapse were both experienced by Cambodians who had nothing to do with either. Rents rose to levels that pushed long-standing residents out of the town. Local businesses that had served tourists lost their customers. Construction proceeded at a pace and with a standard of oversight that produced fatal building collapses. Reporting from the period documented a sharp rise in kidnapping, violence, and public disorder tied to the gambling economy. When the industry collapsed after the 2019 ban, the town was left with a skyline of unfinished concrete and an economy that had been restructured around something that no longer existed. In the Myanmar border regions, communities living beside these developments have described land being taken, armed men controlling movement, and an influx of foreign workers under guard. Some local people have found employment in construction and services around the compounds, which creates its own dependency and its own reluctance to see them go. And there is a broader reputational cost that falls on entire countries. Nations that host these operations, frequently without their central governments having any capacity to prevent it, acquire an international association with fraud that affects their citizens abroad, visa scrutiny, banking difficulties, and the assumption of guilt by association. That cost is borne overwhelmingly by people who have never committed an offense, and who are in many cases the same population being recruited and trafficked. So the accounting on this industry runs wider than the two sets of victims at either end of the conversation. It includes the towns that were rebuilt around it and then abandoned, and the ordinary citizens of the countries whose names it has attached itself to. Which brings us to the question this episode is really about. We now have a crime with victims at both ends. At one end there is a widow in Ohio, a retired teacher in Manchester, a nurse in Sydney, an engineer in Singapore, who has lost their savings and often their home, who is grieving a relationship that never existed, who feels too humiliated to tell their children, and who in many cases will never report it. At the other end there is a graduate from Nairobi, or Hanoi, or Karachi, who answered a job advertisement, whose passport is in a drawer in an office in a border town, who is working 16-hour shifts under a quota, and who is beaten when they fail to meet it. They are talking to each other every day. Neither knows what the other is. And both of them are disbelieved by the people around them. The fraud victim is told they should have known better. The compound worker, on release, is frequently treated as a criminal, and in their home country may face suspicion about what they were really doing. Between them sit the people who actually organized this, who bought the land, built the towers, arranged the protection payments, wrote the training manuals, set the quotas, purchased the workers, and moved the proceeds through the exchanges. Very few of them have ever been inside a compound. Almost none have been in a cell. That asymmetry is the whole story. The industry is designed so that the two categories of people who suffer are the two categories with the least power to speak, and the people who profit are structurally invisible. So what can actually be done? A few things, and they are not evenly distributed between governments and individuals. At the level of policy, the most effective measures so far have been financial rather than physical. Compounds can be rebuilt in a month. Sanctioning the laundering infrastructure, seizing the cryptocurrency, and cutting the payment channels attacks the part of the business that cannot simply be relocated across a river. The seizures of 2025 did more damage than any building demolition. Second, and this costs almost nothing, treat released workers as trafficking victims by default rather than as immigration offenders. Countries that do this get cooperation, testimony, and intelligence. Countries that do not get silence, and they make escape more dangerous for everyone still inside. Third, recruitment interdiction. These advertisements appear on ordinary platforms. Some are now being detected and removed, and some governments have begun issuing specific warnings to their own citizens about the pattern. That is cheap and it works, because the recruitment stage is the only point at which the victim is still free and still has a choice. At the individual level, there are two things worth carrying away. If you are ever offered an overseas job with an unusually good salary, requiring language skills, arranged entirely online, with flights paid, and any part of the arrangement involves traveling to a border region or having your travel documents held by an employer, stop. Verify the company independently, through its own official channels rather than any contact details supplied to you. Tell someone exactly where you are going. And treat any request to surrender your passport as the end of the conversation, because there is no legitimate employer anywhere in the world for whom that is normal. And if you were the victim at the other end of one of these conversations, this episode does not change what happened to you, but it might change how you understand it. You were not outwitted by a suitor. You were processed by an operation that had buildings, management, training materials, performance targets, and a workforce, some of whom were being beaten to keep talking to you. There is one more thing worth saying about where this sits historically, because this series has now covered a range of frauds across 5 centuries. Charles Ponzi ran his scheme alone, from an office, for 8 months, and it was ended by a newspaper hiring an accountant to check his arithmetic. The forger and the impostor worked with a uniform and a printing arrangement. Even the largest frauds of the 20th century were, fundamentally, the work of individuals or small groups exploiting institutions that had not yet built the systems to catch them. What we have described today is a different category of thing. It is fraud reconstituted as heavy industry, with capital investment in real estate, a workforce numbering in the hundreds of thousands, purpose-built physical plant, training departments, quality control, performance management, dedicated technical and financial divisions, and a supply chain for labor that runs through international trafficking. It required 3 things to become possible, and all 3 arrived within about a decade of each other: a communications network that made it as cheap to defraud someone on another continent as someone in the next street, a payment system whose transactions cannot be reversed, and a set of territories where the question of who governs has no answer. None of those 3 is going away. Which means the response cannot be to wait for the industry to burn itself out, because there is no mechanism by which it would. That is why the financial enforcement matters more than the demolitions, and why the treatment of released workers matters more than either. You cannot arrest your way out of an industry whose workforce is largely composed of its victims. Which brings us back to the advertisement. It is still there. Some version of it went up this morning, on a jobs board or a social feed or a messaging group, written in decent English, offering customer service work with accommodation and flights included, at a salary that would change a young graduate's life. Somebody is reading it right now, and thinking that it looks like the opportunity they have been waiting for. Next time on The Great Cons, we go back 500 years, to a letter that arrived from a stranger claiming to be a nobleman imprisoned abroad, with a fortune he could not reach and a daughter he wished to see married, requesting only a small sum to secure his release. We will trace the extraordinary line that runs from that letter, through the age of the telegraph and the fax machine, to the emails that made a particular 3-digit number famous around the world. If this was worth your time, please give it a like, and subscribe so you don't miss it. And if you know someone considering an overseas job offer that came to them online, send them this one. Thank you for watching.